Hi there, you're watching Midwinter Minis, my name's Guy, this video is sponsored by Audible, and you know what that means. It's Titan time. So where were we the last time we worked on the Titan? Its understructure was built and ready to paint, with all of its essential body parts and weapons attached, and all of its armor plates cleaned, washed, and ready to be painted and attached. There's just one little problem though. It's too clean. A bit of boring backstory, most of the Titans in Warhammer 40k, towering war machines powerful enough to stand against a whole army, were first built during the Age of Strife, which, if you're not a massive Warhammer nerd like me, means they are, technically speaking, old as fuck. Each Titan has a different story, but they're often thousands, sometimes tens of thousands of years old. And there's the problem. My Warlord Titan basically looks fresh off the factory floor, so before we get to painting, I want to change that, and make my Titan look like it's faced centuries of intense fighting, and give it some gnarly battle scars.
Battle scars.
Battle scars. I've also been totally inspired by the heavily modified and corroded Acastus Knight that Nurgle Heresy has been making over on Instagram, and while I'm not going to damage mine nearly as heavily, it's given me a bit of confidence to try out the techniques for myself. Before I actually start smashing my precious and very expensive model I've spent hundreds of hours prepping to get to this point, let's do some tests. Fortunately, I've got loads of lovely Forge World resin to work with, because all the Titan parts were attached to these big resin gates. Exactly the same material, but basically useless otherwise, so are perfect for an experiment like this. So what tools have we got to work with? Nurgle Heresy seemed to use a rotary tool, and luckily I also have one. Just a cheap own brand one from Machine Mart here in the UK, but it certainly does the job. I got some cheap cutting discs for it on eBay, but it also comes with some pretty fun shaped tools, so we'll try them out to see what kind of damage they make on the resin. I also have a set of tiny screwdrivers which have some nice sharp edges, which might make for pretty good subtle scratches and scrapes. I've also got my WOW stick, a little pen-sized, low-speed, high-torque drill that's amazing for drilling out the barrels on miniature weapons. All of this stuff is going to kick up a serious amount of resin dust, and that stuff is nasty with a capital N, and can cause serious lung damage and horrible long-term problems. So if you're going to do anything like this yourself, make sure to wear a good respirator. I'm also going to be spending a lot of time with powered cutting tools near my fragile little fingies, so I'm going to wear a bit of protection in the form of a gardening glove. So let's go! First up, the cutting blade. Oh, nice. Slices through the resin like it's not even there, and makes really believable deep cuts and gouges. How about this metal brush tool? Makes some really interesting textures, kind of like deep wood grain or maybe fur. I'm not sure how useful it's going to be for creating battle damage on armor panels, but maybe for something else in the future. How about this nylon disc? Nah, I think that's just for buffing, it's not even doing anything. Next up, the sanding tool. Whoa, this kicks up so much resin dust. I kind of like the effect, but maybe it looks a bit too much like a tool that's made the marks rather than explosions or lasers or insanely sharp power weapons, so I'm not sure this one's going to be so useful. Okay, I've got high hopes for the sanding ball. Oh yeah, it digs out a really nice, deep, smooth, spherical recess into the resin, perfect for explosive impacts and craters. This one's definitely a keeper. Now we've got another sanding tool, this time with a narrow edge. Nah, again, I think it looks too much like a tool has done the damage, and other tools do better cutting damage. There's a few other differently shaped sanding tools too, but they kind of do a similar thing, and the markings they leave behind look too much like they were made with a rotary tool and not future space fantasy guns. So how about those screwdrivers? The Phillips head tools aren't up to much, but the flathead tools make really nice, light, shallow scrapes pretty easily in this material, and you can use the edge of the head to gouge out little nicks, which might look like the paltry damage caused by small arms fire on such a huge war machine. Finally, the WOW stick. Yeah, this obviously does an amazing job of ploughing bigger holes into the resin, and strong enough to go in from off-center angles without too much effort, which should give a nice realistic look to the damage caused. Actually, the nylon brush is going to be perfect for wiping away the resin dust. Nice. So while you take a look at the different effects these tools made on the resin, let me tell you about what I was listening to this week on Audible, who have kindly sponsored this video. 1999 was an amazingly good year for films, and one of my absolute favourites was The Talented Mr. Ripley. But whenever I tell anyone that, they always ask me if I've read the Patricia Highsmith novel because it was better. Well, I decided to listen to the audiobook and find out. If you don't know anything about the story, it's basically a thriller that follows a mysterious young man, Tom Ripley, as he tries to persuade Dickie Greenleaf, the black sheep of a wealthy family, to leave his bohemian lifestyle in Italy and return home to the USA. Again, I don't want to give you any spoilers, but it has one of the most intense, twisting, and sinister plots I've ever experienced. And you have to kind of admire a story that basically has you on the side of a lying, murderous con artist by the end of it, right? So, which was better, the book or the film? I'd say they were both worth experiencing, and pretty awesome in their own way. If you want to give Audible a go, you can get a free month on me by visiting audible.com/midwinterminis or by texting Midwinter Minis to 500500. And don't forget, you can also enjoy all of the included content like the awesome members library, podcasts, serialized shows, and Audible exclusives as part of your trial. Okay, let's get chopping. Rather than keep switching tools, I'll do all of the damage I want with one tool and then switch. First, I use the cutting disc to lacerate the armor panels. And as I said, not going too crazy, just a few select chops here and there, sometimes just a few millimeters long, some quite deep, others long and shallow, but all very intentional and steady. This tool cuts through resin so easily it would be really easy to ruin a panel if I didn't give it my full attention. I also left lots of panels unmarked. I don't want anything to look overdone. It was great fun cutting up the Titan with the disc, but it made me very conscious to not do it too much. To create blast marks and explosion craters, I switched to the ball sander, and I mostly just gave panels a few light touches here and there, but some of them were on the receiving end of more powerful gunfire and were bored out a bit deeper. One armor panel on the Titan's thigh even got a blow through, so that when it's built you'll be able to see the understructure through the hole. Next up, scores and scrapes with the edge of a flat screwdriver. I like the idea that these marks might be made by power weapons that would easily cleave infantry into pieces, but up against the ludicrously thick armor of a god machine, they barely scratch the surface. I tried my best to be pretty random with the scratch placement and direction, but I did focus more on some areas than others, and again, leaving some panels totally untouched. Now onto the WoW stick. I used a fairly large drill bit, the same size as a las cannon barrel, so that should give you an idea of how tiny and insignificant the damage caused by one of the most devastatingly powerful weapons in normal games of 40k would be when fired at a mighty Warlord Titan. Again, coming in from a sideways angle on some of the shots to add some variety. As I said, doing all of this dirty work kicks up so much resin dust and loads of shavings, so I made sure to vacuum up everything in between the steps, and I had a little air filter running on the desk to reduce the airborne stuff as much as I could. Now for the oldest trick in the book. Well, the oldest trick in the Midwinter Minis book anyway. I added some Agrellan Earth texture paint to some of the armor panels, as when it dries, it'll crack, and it'll hopefully look like the age-old paint on the Titan is flaking away in some areas. I did this way back in my first ever video, speed painting sandstone Necrons back in 2018, and I still love the effect. And after a pleasant afternoon smashing, cutting, boring, scraping and texturing the most expensive Warhammer 40k model, I've got a table full of lovely battle damaged armor plates. Now I know I could leave it here, but I am a bit intrigued as to what it might look like painted up. And also I'm itching to try out the colour scheme suggested by Zingbo in my last video. Basically the Midwinter Minis logo scheme of ice cold greeny blue on a black background with white pattern details. I'll start off with some grey plastic primer to fix on the Agrellan Earth texture paint and give the rest of the paint something to adhere to. Make sure to give it a good shake first. Next, some matte black spray paint. This will do the lion's share of the work and essentially base coat the black for me. I bet you thought that now I'm in a fancy, dedicated studio I didn't keep my stuff in cute doggy fireman lunchboxes anymore. Well, think again. This one is full of packing foam and sponge offcuts, and I'm going to use this to build up some texture on the black armor panel. Of course, I want the armor to still read as black, so I'm going to keep the highlights quite minimal and not go too bright with my paint choice. First up, German grey, which is a kind of charcoaly off black, a bit on the palette, dab 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 with the sponge, and then onto the central areas of the inner armor panel sections. Next up, I'll use some neutral grey as my lightest colour. First by smushing it in with the same sponge as I used the German grey to create a linking colour. And then by doing a very light dry brush with pure neutral grey, doing my best to accentuate the damaged sections and crackly paint without putting too much on the flat armour panel itself. Now, if I was going to add some white patterns on the armour, I would do it right now, but I'm not sure what designs I want to go for just yet, so I'm going to skip straight to the trim. You'll notice that the paints I just applied have different finishes, so it looks a little bit weirdly shiny in a non-uniform way, but we'll fix that in a minute. Now, to be honest, I'm not sure I have the exact colours I need to nicely match the greeny blue of my logo, but I know someone who does. Hattie, the former Games Workshop and Warhammer Plus videographer and editor, is now part of Team Midwinter Minis, and has brought all of her paints with her. Man, I thought I had a lot of paints. And also, unlike me, she has eyes that actually work, and she recommended base coating with Thousand Suns Blue, and then highlighting with Baharoth Blue. First up, the Thousand Suns Blue. And for a base paint, it's actually quite transparent, so it needed a couple of thin coats to stop the black showing through and looking too streaky. Same thing with the Baharoth Blue, it needed 2 thin coats over that darker blue base coat. Now, I don't really mind it being a bit too streaky and transparent though, as I want the armour to look aged and not pristine. Now, to add some quick and dirty shading, I mixed Atramentum Black, a black wash from Green Stuff World, 50-50 with water, and applied it to the whole armour panel, blue bits included. And as soon as I'd applied it, I switched out to a dry, stiff bristled brush and stippled away the wash from the flat parts of the blue trim, and also a few areas of the black armour just to add more layers of texture. And this is what it looks like after the wash is dried. Definitely getting there. To add a bit more texture to the nice bright blue, I stippled on some more Baharoth blue to the flat sections with a small, stiff brush, and then used the layer paint Blue Horror to gently and carefully dry brush the outer edges of the armour. Now, I'm conscious that I don't want to be spending too long on each armour panel as there are dozens and dozens of them to get through, but I used a small detail brush to edge highlight just some of the parts of the armour trim that were bordering the black that I couldn't hit with the dry brushing. I made a few mistakes here and there, that's inevitable, but I quickly switched out to the German grey again and tidied up any blue smears on the black armour panels. The trim looks fine as it is just now, but I reckon it would look better for not too much more effort to add a dot of gunmetal paint to all of the rivets, and for that I used plate mail from Army Painter. And now's a good time, I think, to try to get a more uniform finish on all of the paints I've used. Some are way more matte, but others are pretty shiny. A quick blast of slightly diluted micro satin varnish should do the trick. Now, everything has a pretty uniform sheen to it, and that should also protect the paint job a little bit too. Finally, to add a different look to the battle damaged areas, I grabbed some Dirty Down Verdigris and applied it to the recesses of the cuts, bullet and explosion damage. And while it was drying, I used a moist cotton bud to remove the excess from the edges. So this is what the armor panels of the Titan could look like. I might do a couple more experiments before the next video to see if I can get a similar look with fewer steps, maybe by using more opaque base coats for the blue trim, or maybe using an oil wash instead of acrylic ink. But overall, I'm pretty happy with how this looks. And best of all, I would say that it's a perfect color match for my logo. Nice. Absolutely enormous thanks to the channel's amazing supporters on Patreon. We simply couldn't make these videos full time if it weren't for your support. And here's a shout out to the newest members. Tyler, Whoop-de-Whoop, Alberto Lopez Rivas, Jamin Davidson, Michaha Pell, Alexander Kinner, Benjamin Hilker, Dungeon Master Bill, Foible, The Poltergeek, Jeroth Diggerden, Brandon Camacho, Broken Astartes, Papa Bear, Jeff Lebowski, Alex Scales, and Lasse Lundgodbersen. Thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to check out audible.com/midwinterminis to claim your free Audible trial on me, and I'll catch you next time. Bye for now.